All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, or maybe even good evening. Thanks for joining a webinar here today on deploying Microsoft Teams, but staying in control, meaning once that thing is opened up in your environment, how do you make sure that you can put the things in place that ensure that all of your users are actually happy and it's their favorite tool, that they love the tool that you put in place. So we're going to dive into it. First, don't hesitate to ask any questions. There is a Q&A button that you should see in the bar. It might be above, it might be below, where you can ask any member of our team here for questions during this webinar. We'll do our best to answer any detailed questions, but it's possible that we won't have time, or sometimes we won't even have the answer. And we'll get back to you through a blog post that will follow up in probably a day or two that will include the recording. So if the question is, will this webinar be recorded? Yes, it's actually already recording me right now. So welcome to deploying Microsoft Teams and staying in control. Let's get started. Now, my name is Benjamin Nyland. You can reach me at bnyland on Twitter at any point in time. I work here at ShareGate as the head of product, where we manage or build 3 products, one for migration called ShareGate Desktop, where we're positioning itself a little bit more for restructuring to adopt the modern workplace, going flat and so on. ShareGate Apricot that focuses on helping Microsoft Teams becoming everyone's favorite tool through governance. And of course, ShareGate Overcast, that's for understanding, reducing, and tracking your cost in Azure. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. I do want to give you a heads up after the webinar. And you know what? Even during the webinar on Twitter using hashtag ShareGateChat, participate with the questions at 3 p.m. Eastern time or after the webinar. We'll be posting a couple of questions to get the discussion started. If you want to follow, if you want to continue engaging with us afterwards and just see what the answers are with people around Twitter, feel free to start right away during the webinar if you have any questions. Now, there's a little housekeeping. Let's get started. First things first, you probably migrated. I've covered this before. And everybody that's migrating usually starts with a straightforward migration checklist. That means that at that point, when you're moving to Office 365 and you're bringing in your important content from your file shares or from whatever else SharePoint on premises, wherever, when you're doing this, you're simply going through a checklist and you want to make sure that it migrates as fast as possible and that there's no errors. To start thinking about Microsoft Teams and all these things surrounding it is far in your mind because you want to make sure there's no downtime. Now, of course, this brings me to a slide that I find extremely important that I repeat over and over and over is when we move to Office 365, this is what we see. And for those of you that haven't seen this before, I just want to go over it very quickly. Because everyone goes through this. And I saw through the poll before we started this webinar that most of you are considering going or about to deploy Microsoft Teams in Office 365. So we're still in this phase where you came from on-premises, wherever file share or SharePoint, and you're from a top-down structure, physical architecture, I mean, with sites and subsites or folders with subfolders. You have classic SharePoint, you have Exchange, you have the Office suite, you control every aspect of your deployment, of your training. You're in 100% control of everything that happens with the platform. Then you move to Office 365, but I like to call this part of the journey online because typically when I'm speaking to people at conferences or customers, they're not using the words like teams or groups or collaboration in that sense. They're using, well, I've got SharePoint Online or I've got Exchange Online and we're using it and we're trying to adopt the modern stuff. And that typically tells me that you're still in the top-down structure. You're still thinking about sites with subsites. You're still looking at classic SharePoint. We'll talk about that in 2 seconds, or the modern experience in some cases. Now you're starting to deal with automatic updates that come frequently, multiple products to govern, and we'll talk about that. operational expense instead of capital expenses, which shifts your mind a little bit because now you have to make sure that you use the most of what you're paying. So you're starting to make sure that you want to adopt most of Office 365. And now, of course, you start talking about security because we're in the cloud and there's all these concerns and things happening in the world where you want to make sure that by letting people build and use what they want, it's still in a controlled environment. So external sharing and all multi-factor authentication and all these things we're talking about. The last part of the journey that I find extremely important, and to me, when we're talking about Microsoft Teams, we're talking about this last phase, this migration where essentially we are on Office 365, but we are shifting to what Microsoft calls the modern workplace. Essentially, this is a name that Microsoft has branded. It's a theme. You can't look it up to find features. It's a theme that says, okay, these people are using Office 365 in the way we at Microsoft intended to. And that means we have self-service on. Anyone can create the things that they need to create to get work done. We'll talk about that as well. We're dealing with multiple products at the same time. So we're no longer just enabling SharePoint and Exchange and maybe OneDrive for Business. Now we have this bundle of products that came with the suite that we want to maximize and use while empowering everyone in the organization to organically grow, scale, and use the products properly, which means decentralizing or rather democratizing the use of technology to get work done in this world where everything is fast-paced now. And of course, the bigger challenge is being flat instead of top-down when we're talking about physical hierarchies. Now, I know that your organization is top-down, most likely. You have departments that have sub-teams and then that have sub-teams, and that's going to stay. I'm not saying that your company has to change its culture overnight. I'm saying that the way we built the tools, a bit different when we start creating things, where instead of using folders with subfolders, we put all our documents, say, in a document library and we tag them instead. Well, the same notion now applies to the physical structure of things. So this was a little very quick recap. I want to talk about Microsoft Teams, of course, but I want to make sure everyone understands what I'm talking about when I'm going from on-premises to online. And finally, here talking about Microsoft Teams. To me, I find I talk to two types of organization these days, two big categories. And it's not a one's negative and one's positive or one's more forward-thinking. It has nothing to do with that. What I'm talking about is there's organizations that have never heard of SharePoint, that have never really built Microsoft-based intranets or portals, as we like to call them. And instead, they enter Office 365 through the buzz and the marketing around new ways of communicating and collaborating around a brand, to me, called Microsoft Teams. And Microsoft Teams is two things to me. It's a product that does something, and we'll talk about that because it's very important, but it's also a representation of working in that modern workplace we were talking about in just a few seconds here on the right-hand side. Because if you're an organization that's starting from Microsoft Teams, you're really directly starting from this point in time where you get multiple products at the same time, everyone's working together, communicating, and it's not exactly the same method as starting from a SharePoint-based environment where you're used to portals and intranets with sites, and now you want to add Microsoft Teams to it. Very different scenarios, not that one is bad or another is better, it's just different approaches to deploying and enabling this platform that creates a lot of changes in your organization, no matter which take you start from. So Microsoft Teams is really that brand and that product that embraces that change and starts right into it. And our workplace is changing. Don't worry, I'm not going to do let's think about the philosophy of things. I just want to acknowledge that this is from Avanade. I found rather interesting. Generations are changing, and with that, I know we're getting tired of it. Everyone's talking about millennials, now we're talking about the generation Z or Z, depending where you come from in the world. But I found it regardless very interesting because where we come from, perhaps more of an Outlook based scenario, we can see that that's not so much what people may be focused on these days to communicate or to talk to others. It may be more team workspaces or very highly instant messaging. It might be persistent chat, conversational user interfaces. So we know that as we grow, that workplace is changing. And of course, the tools that we put in place, because as a company, what do we want to do? We want to make sure that we're growing with the times. We want to give everyone the tools that they need to be able to innovate in their industry and whatever it is you're doing. If you're selling clothes, I mean, there's different ways of selling clothes today. It's the same thing as if you're in tech, or if you're, everything is changing and your approach is changing. That means the tools that you use at work to enable people to get that work done need to change as well. So we know that that workplace is changing. And when we're talking about Microsoft Teams, remember, I mean, two things when I talk about Microsoft Teams. And I think Microsoft, and I don't know if everyone is from Microsoft here, but they're excellent in that marketing. So when we hear Microsoft Teams, it means many different things to different people. And so sometimes when we talk about Microsoft Teams, people think it's this new approach to collaboration where we need to compare it to a previous approach to collaboration, which could be a SharePoint team site, for example. And this couldn't be further from the truth, because ultimately, when we're speaking about Microsoft Teams, all we're talking about is a chatting tool. I know I'm definitely not in the marketing side of Microsoft here, but Microsoft Teams ultimately, I know it does a lot of things. I know it does voice calls. I know, but ultimately it's a chat tool plus plus. But there's also a brand around it that represents that new method of collaborating and the new approach to using technology in the workplace that falls under the umbrella that Microsoft calls the modern workplace. So while we're going through this webinar, this session, we have to make sure that we understand that we're talking about Microsoft Teams as a tool that enables people to chat, to do calls, to do live meetings, and that's what this tool is. And I'll dive into what it enables and how we can make sure that it goes down successfully. So overview, first things first. I know I'm sorry about the colors, but this is where I like to start and where I always start. I separate things into three major categories: me, work; we, work; and us, work. And this helps me because there's different tools in Office 365 that tackle these different categories. When I'm talking about me work, I'm talking about individual workspaces. So we're talking about your mailbox, right? This belongs to you as an individual. Yes, it belongs to the organization, but you log into your mailbox, only you have access to it, and you can communicate to people. So your mailbox is part of your me work, and OneDrive for Business is part of your me work. It's your, one part of it is your storage in the cloud, but it's your personal storage in the cloud, right? At work, it belongs to the organization, but it's your personal space. When you're in Microsoft Teams has a section for one-on-one chats or little group chats that are not yet a team, and we'll discuss that in a second. That falls onto the me work as well. If you are under we work, now we're talking about Microsoft Teams team. I know, SharePoint, Planner, Power BI workspaces, stream video channels, so much that goes into the we part of the work. Look at it as the team that needs to get work done. Look around you, who's working with you. That team needs to get something done, a project, or represents a department. Well, they are going to be part of the we work, and that's what we're going to be looking at there. Lastly, we have us work. And us work, we're not going to talk about in this webinar, but it's really more the division portals, the hub sites, the communication sites, Yammer, where us as an organization or us as a department and as a division would like to talk to others. We were getting work done, me, and all this is very important in what we're about to talk. Because in the me work, we'll find Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams, and both will be able to talk to each other. And there's some things that you have to look into, of course, whether Teams and Skype work together. Some things are available, some are not. But what's important is that all of the files that you upload while you're working in a one-to-one chat. So let me quickly skip and go into my Microsoft Teams' web app over here. If I'm in chat and I start typing to start a new chat and I decide that I want to talk to Angelina Jolie here, all of the files that I would be uploading while we're chatting will actually get uploaded to my personal space, my OneDrive for Business. So it's something important to take into consideration, because as your employees leave or as your employees get transferred or whatever happens where they are no longer part of your organization, you disable their account or you delete their account, whatever your method is, it's important to take that into consideration, because all of these one-on-one chats that have happened on the side, the files have been uploaded during these chats into that person who uploaded them, OneDrive for Business, and then shared into the chat. The file actually lives in OneDrive for Business. So in terms of governance and making sure that we control all of this later, it's something that's important to take into consideration. And of course, you can have multiple people in the chat, but it's still considered me work, and thus you use the me tools, one-on-one chat plus OneDrive for Business. Now, the other aspect is going to be Microsoft Teams. Yeah, I know. So in Microsoft Teams, so the space, what Microsoft has dubbed the Teams Hub for Productivity. And that's the brand of it. It's the space where productivity happens, but ultimately it's a white box where people get to chat, right? Now bear with me because we're gonna go a lot further with all of this. Microsoft Teams ultimately is just that. And don't give it more power than it is if you are the person that's responsible for rolling it out and making it a successful part of the suite that you're using for your users. Yes, it's a good word. It's a hub for productivity. But ultimately, what you're managing is this. You go into Microsoft Teams, you go to the Teams, you choose one, whichever one it is. Inside of it, you'll have channels, which we'll discuss, and within it, you can chat, right? Now, Microsoft Teams power is that you have the chat room, and then you have the ability to add tabs at the top that allows you to see things that are in Office 365 or even outside of Office 365, because you can literally connect almost anything inside as a tab. You also have concepts of connectors, but I don't want to go into the end user interface of Microsoft Teams. I know you can look that up. What I want you to make sure is to understand that this tool is this chat room over here. And the fact that you can do a video call is great, that you can do an audio call is great. But what Microsoft Teams truly is a place where you create what they call a team, so a space where you can have persistent chat rooms for people to chat in. That's it. Microsoft Teams is not a place for files. And you'll be like, well, Benjamin, there's a section called files, and we can see files that are in our conversations. No, these are not inside of Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is incapable of storing your files. If you're doing one-on-one chats, your files go to OneDrive, and then they're represented in your chat room. If you're in a team chat in the we type of work, your files get stored in a team site and then represented in the chat room. The section called files here is not your Teams files, it's the Teams files that are in SharePoint simply displayed here, right? The power of Microsoft Teams and why we call it the hub for productivity is that it is the tool that allows you to grab content for that group of people that is stored in other products that are better at what they do and display it right there where you work and where you're talking with your colleagues. And that's the true power of Microsoft Teams and why it's gotten so much press and why it's so attracting to organizations, because people don't have to jump from Outlook to SharePoint to Wikis to OneNote. They stay in the same tool. They discuss a document. They have a video call. They chat about the document and leave comments associated to it. And that's the true value of it. All right. Hope everyone's good. So what Microsoft Teams truly is that chat room where people do this with a built-in access to SharePoint, OneNote, Planner, and other software that allows you to collaborate and do stuff as we type of work happens. So ultimately, when you're looking at this, this is what Microsoft Teams is. All right, let's jump into it a little bit here. Actually, before we do, there's two things. You create teams, and the definition of a team is a collection of people, content, and tools surrounding different projects. And then within it, you create channels where it's a dedicated section within the team to keep conversations organized. Places where everyone on the team can have conversation can be extended with tabs, connectors, and bots. And that's essentially what you'll be looking at. You'll have your organization, then you'll have a bunch of teams in a flat manner, right? The way to group them and to logically organize them will exist through another method than Teams, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. In short, when you're building a team, they're flat, all of them, under your organization directly. There's no this department and this division. You just build teams, and within them you have channels that host conversations and access to your files, to your notes, other tabs or connectors. And that's how this works. Great, it looks beautiful here. Whoops, we have a number of access, and I'll update this slide a few seconds. Must have changed in while we changed it, but essentially it's the access. All these little U with the two dots here, assume they're check marks. And it's essentially the separation between what does a team owner allows you to do, what does a team member allows you to do, and what, yes, people outside of your organization have access to in Microsoft Teams. So it's important because team owners can create new teams, of course, leave the team, but what they're important, because this is a new role in Office 365 now, when we have a group of people, but within this group of people, we identify who the owner is. And what's important about the team owners, and why you want to make sure there's always a team owner somewhere in the team, is because they are the ones responsible for not only editing the settings, but also making sure the members are the right members inside of your Office 365 group. They're usually the ones that are also going to add channels and edit channel names and descriptions and overall settings, or delete the team. Some of the access to team members can be modified and tweaked to make sure that they have access as well, but typically speaking, they won't. So assume that all of these here, they do not have access, neither at the bottom as well, and it's typically going to be the team owners. So as you're giving power to these team owners, there's going to be some things we're going to talk about when we're talking about governance and making sure everything is smooth, is what happens when you have no more team owners in a team, right? What if Joe was the team owner and he's left the company and he was owner on 20 teams? Who can change the settings, add the members? So there's a couple of things that I'll encourage you to do to make sure that that goes well. Some limits and specifications to keep in mind. The number of teams a user can create, about 250. Now, this is not a Microsoft Teams limit. And remember, keep this in mind. I'll get back to it in a second. Microsoft Teams is a thing that allows you to create chat rooms. And when you're going to want to govern teams or control the settings of teams, it's not going to be happening in Teams itself. The settings for Teams will be, do you want to enable emojis or not? Do you like to have voice calls included or not? Do you want to enable people to create tabs and connectors? Those are going to be the settings for Teams, but that's not the questions you're wondering when you're talking about scaling inside of your organizations with things like self-service or controlled self-service. So all of these limits, I'll talk to you in a second, they actually belong to another object that secretly controls Microsoft Teams behind the scenes. But the number of teams you can create, around 250 as an individual user. Don't worry, as an administrator, you do not have such limits. The number of members in a team, 5,000 about, because a team is made for rework. It doesn't make too much sense to have larger amounts of members, though there is a concept of an org-wide team. This is a type of team that you can create where every time a new user gets added, they will automatically join this team. It's automatic. And then you have a couple of limits here at the top. I believe you can read, so I'm going to skip through this and let you check it out. So now we dive into what's actually happening behind the scenes. Because Microsoft Teams is just a chat tool. You click on create, you get a white square, and in there you can chat. Oh, and you can add tabs that show you things that are outside of Microsoft Teams. So what exactly is happening every time you create a Microsoft Teams? Well, SharePoint's required. That means that when you're using Microsoft Teams and every time you create a new Microsoft Teams, you also get a brand new, congratulations, modern SharePoint team sites. Very important. Every time you create a Microsoft Teams, because I had people tell me, oh no, Benjamin, we have self-service turned on, we don't have modern SharePoint, we're completely staying the way we are. And then later on in our chat, they're like, oh, I have a couple of questions about Teams. Wait a minute, what? Well, these people are creating Microsoft Teams. I'm like, oh, you don't realize that every time you created a Microsoft Teams, you also created a modern SharePoint team site. And that person went back into panic mode and realized that they had over 2,000 SharePoint team site that they had not realized that they had. Interesting story. That person actually left my training right then and there. So SharePoint Online is required. And every time you deploy a new Microsoft Teams for people to start chatting, you're actually provided them with a brand new modern SharePoint team site with all the power that a modern SharePoint team site grants. Pages, news, document libraries, which means flows, which means Power Apps, which means much more than what you think you opened up. If you are in a one-on-one chat, you're not using SharePoint. SharePoint is only for teams. If you're using one-on-one chat, it's OneDrive for Business that is used in the back. And of course, that means that you have to have that enabled for the people that are using that feature. Very quickly, I've said modern SharePoint a few times. When I'm talking about classic SharePoint, I'm talking about this look and feel, the older SharePoint. And it's not a version, it's not on-prem SharePoint, it's the group of all the SharePoints that we consider are now old, classic. And that means this look and feel. You know what? If you click on browse or page, if you have a menu bar at the top and then you see a ribbon, that ribbon that we used to see from Word 2007, but in SharePoint, if you see a ribbon in SharePoint, then you know you're using classic. When we're talking about modern SharePoint, I'm talking about this SharePoint over here, the new look and feel, and that's what I mean by it. Now, I also want to quickly talk to you about Planner, because Planner is a tool that you absolutely get every time you create a Microsoft Teams as well. Not only do you get a brand new SharePoint modern team site with your Microsoft Teams, but you also get a brand new Planner plan. And you get also other things. I'll get to that. Planner is a way for you to create columns. And then within these columns, you create what they call cards that represent ultimately a task. And then you move these cards from the left column to the right column to represent their progress. So I would have a column called to do, doing, done, and then you create your task as cards. which have tons of functionality, of course. And as I move the card from to do to doing, then obviously it tells everyone that it's in doing, helps me track my projects, comes with some dashboards and analytics, fun tool, but that's not the purpose of today. So what's important is that if we noted, every single Microsoft Teams chat room comes with a modern SharePoint team site. And what did I say about Microsoft Teams earlier? They're flat under the organization. There's no way to organize Microsoft Teams in groups, in logical groups that make sense to you. When you're gonna open up this Microsoft Teams software right here, right? Let me just open it up. And you click on Teams, and you're gonna be looking at these teams over here. That's gonna be all your teams. Your teams, there you go. And that's a very small test environment, as you can tell by the name of these teams. So there's no like grouping of, hey, this is gonna be the marketing teams, this is gonna be all these sales teams, and they're just gonna be flat. So hint, naming convention, ideally would definitely help you sort out a little bit, but that's gonna be something you'll have to think about to help increase the adoption productivity of people. But ultimately, you want people to love that tool. You want them to want to come back and use the tool. And if they can never find where their things are, where their teams are, that's going to be a challenge for sure. So it's important for you to start going flat in what you create, because if you currently have SharePoint already established and this SharePoint comes with subsites, those subsites will never get their own Microsoft Teams, because Microsoft Teams can only be added to a modern team site that's flat under the organization. Now, don't worry, there's going to be a way for you to logically organize things back into a logical structure that represents your business, but it only happens on the SharePoint side of things. So I know it's confusing, isn't it? Okay, let's recap very quickly. You got a Microsoft Teams, that's a chat room and nothing else. Stop giving it more power than what it is. When you create a new Microsoft team, you get a chat room. Great. When you created this chat room, it came with a brand new Microsoft SharePoint team site attached to it. This new Microsoft team site is going to be directly under your Office 365 tenant representing your organization. And all these chat rooms are all going to create a new team site. There are all ways for you to start from a team site and then add a Microsoft Teams to it, as long as this team site is already at the top right under your Office 365 tenant. So of course, the next step is, how do you logically organize the structure of SharePoint that is attached to your Microsoft Teams to create that logical structure of, well, this is the marketing division, and under marketing, we have SEO, we have ads, we have all of these other subgroups that will be, again, flat but logically structured. I'm not going to dive back into that. I encourage you to watch our other webinar that's now available for recording, Office 365, move to Office 365, now what? We'll try to add it in the description as well, so you can jump back into it and dive into that restructuring with hub sites. Now, Microsoft's vision is really to have a flat environment where things are linked to a hub site, but that you can essentially move afterwards to a new location. And that's the benefit of having things flat. I encourage you to check out the URL at the bottom. It's a co-creation between very dear friend and MVP Susan Hanley and Microsoft that work together to help you plan that logical structure. But I'll move on to Microsoft Teams. And let's eliminate that confusion now once and for all. Do not ask anyone or me anymore, when do you use Microsoft Teams versus SharePoint or versus an Office 365 group? Because that question does not make sense. SharePoint is to store content, Microsoft Teams is the chat, and Office 365 group is the secret player behind it all. And let's get to that famous slide that is and will be in every one of my sessions for the rest of time. Because what we've been talking about is creating this little chat room here called Microsoft Teams. And because of its name and Microsoft's branding and, oh, it's the hub for productivity, we assume that it does so much more. But the true power of it is it leverages the power of the other tools in the suite and bring them together. And Microsoft Teams is the chat room that when you create will automatically go to Exchange server and create a mailbox with this Microsoft team as well. It'll automatically go to SharePoint and create a team site associated to this mailbox and to Microsoft Teams. It'll go to Planner and create a new plan that's associated to this team site, this mailbox, and Microsoft Teams. And the list goes on. I can go on forever. This is just a short diagram, but it's the same thing when Microsoft Forms is also attached to your Microsoft Teams. It's also Power BI workspaces. It's also Microsoft Stream. It's also almost every single tool that falls into the category of we work in Office 365 that will be attached to Microsoft Teams every time you create one. The secret to be successful in governing and scaling your Microsoft Teams so that every user in your organization loves using it is to realize that they're not attached to your Microsoft Teams chat room. It's all of them attached to another object behind the scene in Active Directory called an Office 365 group, sometimes called an Office group, sometimes called a unified group, depending on where you are and what you're doing. You remember in Active Directory, you're still using them today, they're called security groups. They're a group of people that we place together under a shell that we call a security group, and then we grant them access to that security group in various places in our environment. We go to a file share and we grant access to that folder to a security group called marketing that includes 10 people. Now what happens is that every time you create your Microsoft Teams, first it goes to Active Directory. It creates that security group version 2.0 called an Office group. It puts the people that you want inside of it, and then goes and creates your Microsoft Teams, your mailbox, your SharePoint, your planner, your Power BI, your form, and whatever else, and grants access to that group to these objects. So yes, it looks like, I mean, if you're going through the marketing thing, it looks like it all is attached to Microsoft Teams, and Microsoft Teams is the hub for productivity. It's an amazing tool, don't get me wrong, but if you want to govern it and scale with it, you're not going to find too many settings in the Teams Admin Center. You're going to find them at the source where you manage the core object that manages all these objects, called the Office 365 group. All right. Now, very quickly, we talked about hub sites to logically organize your team sites, which means your teams and other sites. And ultimately, what you'll find is that three-tiered navigation. You have your global thing here at the top. Then you'll have your hub site navigation here. And then you'll have your individual team site navigation there. It's the same how at Microsoft and Xbox will work. You have Microsoft in the top. Then you have the hub site navigation for Xbox, and then you'll have this individual Microsoft Teams SharePoint team site navigation, and that's how you logically structure all of these things. So these are tons of URLs that will help you get started. Before I get into all of this governance thing, you have the success with Teams. I like teamwork tools at .azurewebsites.com. All of these will be available for you to go into. So I recommend you go into them. Microsoft has done an amazing job providing tons of helpful content and interactive demos and practical guides, templates for emails to deploy internally, lots of information there in this slide. But let's go into my environment and let's go into Microsoft Teams, right? We're gonna create a Microsoft team right here. And we're going to call it, actually, I want to show you something else. I want you to see what can happen in your environment. So let me get into that real quick. Now, of course, this always hides behind my, having a hard time because my webinar bar is coming up too quickly. There you go. So let's go into my environment. And what I'm going to show you is a typical user behavior if left uncontrolled and unmanaged. I'm a typical user. Call me Brad Pitt. And I click, what? Gotta have fun with these webinars at the same time. So I'm a typical user, and I decide that I want to create a new SharePoint team site. So I create a new team site. It's going to be modern. I'm going to give it a name, and the name of this webinar is going to be called, of this site is going to be called Apricot. Now, when I create this, I click on next. I'm going to add Brad as an owner. Maybe I'll add Angelina as a member. Click on finish. Now, what's happening behind the scenes now? I just created a team site, right? That's what I think I did. As a regular end user that's followed no training, no change management, no communications. I know SharePoint, and it's got a new look and feel, great. And then later on in life, now pay attention to my URL, /sites/apricot. Now, I'm in Microsoft Teams, maybe 6 months later, maybe 3 months later. And I'm wondering, hey, I heard about this Microsoft Teams things from this other co-workers. So what am I going to do as a regular end user? What do regular end users do? Well, they go to their office, and then of course, what do they click on? App, Teams. They launch Microsoft Teams because that's what they've heard of. They don't understand that your team site already comes with a Microsoft Teams and it's attached, and it's an Office 365 group and Active Directory, and they just heard SharePoint. They go to SharePoint, they click create, then go to Teams, and they don't see a team called Apricot. So what do? They click on create team, build a team from scratch, of course, private, and they call it Apricot. They click on create. Nice work. Of course, nice work, right? Do I want to start typing a name to add more members? I'm like, well, no, it's all good. Skip. So now I created a Microsoft Teams called Apricot. But if I open the SharePoint that is attached to this Microsoft Teams that I just created, look at the URL, Apricot 170. It duplicated my site. I have a site called Apricot that if I pay attention in the bottom left, I could have joined a Microsoft Teams to this team site, but because I went straight to SharePoint, to Microsoft Teams and decided to create a new one, instead, it created Apricot 170 and essentially duplicated my collaboration web. And you have to figure out which one you want to keep, the SharePoint team site with all the files or the Teams with all the conversations. Interesting. So what's important is to understand that every time you created one of these things, they're all already attached, but you may have to come here and click on create team so that it gets attached to it, because if you start an Office 365 group from anything other than Microsoft Teams will not be created. It will be optional. I repeat, if you go to Outlook and you click New Outlook Group, if you go to SharePoint and you click New Team Site, if you go to Planner and you click New Plan, if you go to Power BI and you click on New Workspace, you will get this entire package, but the Microsoft Teams will not get attached. It will be left optional. It will be reserved. If your end users come on the side and create a Microsoft team with the same name, it will duplicate the entire package of products once more with the same name. All right, let's jump into, all right, I think you guys are good, right? In other words, Microsoft Teams isn't a magical unicorn, it's a group chat. It's a group chat. It allows you to join these other things together. The thing you have to realize that you're managing is an Office 365 group. So if you've already deployed Microsoft Teams before the next things I'm about to cover, you're probably in for quite a ride. or hopefully you've already done some of it. So ultimately, you've got a couple of things you got to think about. Naming conventions, life cycle. Life cycle means how do you create Office 365 groups? That's Microsoft Teams, right? Let's stop giving power to Microsoft Teams. We understand how it works now, and you understand what you're enabling people to create is an Office 365 group in Active Directory, which starts a script that creates Microsoft Teams, team sites, and everything else. Prevention of duplication, how are you going to figure that one out? Classifications, content location, if ever you're in a hybrid environment, and ownership of permissions management. If you allow people to scale with Microsoft Teams, because it's good that they are working in an environment that you provide with the tools that you provide, but they have the access to quickly create what they need and what they want, and all of these great tools provide them with the capabilities to do it, you also have to figure out a way to make sure that security follows all of these things that are growing organically, if you will. So of course you can go to Teams Admin Center, and let's go to it very quickly. I won't spend too much time there, but let's go here, and in the Admin Center of Office 365, you have the ability to click on Teams, and there you'll have some settings. You have a number of things. You'll be able to see the Teams portion of it. So you'll be able to click on Teams, manage Teams, and you'll have a number of teams that may have already been created, which will be visible here. You'll have a number of channels, members, owners, guests, privacy, some status, whether they're archived, which isn't archived, by the way. It's just a sort of a tag. They stay there. So anyways, we'll talk about that in a second. And you'll see all of your Microsoft Teams there. You'll be able to select them to edit some of their basic settings. You'll be able to go to team policies. These team policies are typically much more into the communication aspect of it. So you can create a policy, create private channels is on, discover private teams, and then apply. And now you have this new policy that's been created that has these settings on. You can discover how it works and how you want to apply it. Then you have a bunch of settings, but all of these settings are more about the chatting and the voice functions, right? The meeting settings, the devices setting, the messaging policies, the voice settings, the org-wide settings such as external access and some basic team settings, email integration, whether or not you allow Dropbox and Google Drive to be connected. But that's not where you're going to be managing teams so that they scale in your environment, because Teams is just the chat room. What you're managing is Office 365 groups. I know I'm annoying, I'm repeating it all the time, but it's important. Where you'll be going is in Active Directory in Azure that is automatically linked to your Office 365. Yes, you have one. Everyone has one. All environments worldwide has one. And you have a little thing here called Active Directory. And Active Directory will show you all your groups, your security groups, but also the two apricot groups that we created today. One that has Microsoft Teams and one that we forgot to add Microsoft Teams. So here, let's check it out. A new preview has been enabled. Let's see what happens. We'll see. So we click on it. I don't even know which one. Oh, there we go. 170 and not 170. These are the email addresses that have been generated because every time you created a Microsoft Teams, which created an Office 365 group, it created a mailbox first. And now you got to make sure you're friends with the Active Directory people, the Exchange people, the SharePoint people, the Power BI people. Have fun. So here I'll click on Apricot and I'll see my owners. I'll see me and Brad Pitt. I'll see the members, which obviously includes everyone plus Angelina Jolie. And this is where you'll have some other like group membership settings. We'll talk about that, where you want to add manually, or you can also do this dynamically. And you will have some of the settings that we're going to be talking about later. You'll see some of the basic settings, but I'm going to talk to you about these settings we're looking into a little bit more. So the Microsoft Teams Admin Center is good for Teams. Start what we need to look at to scale, to govern, to make sure that everything is adopted successfully. I provided these hyperlinks so that you can go into the Microsoft documentation for everything I'm going to cover. But essentially, first you need to know your limits, and I talked about some of them beforehand. That maximum number of group members, about 1,000. Users can join up to 1,000 groups, maximum number of Office 365 users can join at the same time. You got certain size limits, and I'll let you look at all of this. The first thing that you have to look into is who can create Office 365 groups, which means teams, which means team sites, right? You have a couple of choices, and I've done the poll at the beginning asking that very same question. Do you have this setting on, or do you control it, or do you have it disabled? And you have to find a fine line. You can have a group creation policy, meaning that you can choose individuals in your organization that have the power to create Office 365 groups, and only they will be able to create Office 365 groups. However, this requires Azure AD Premium. So for those of you that don't have Azure AD Premium, then you will not be able to set that setting. That means you either have the setting to on, everyone can create Office 365 groups as long as they have an Active Directory account, or off, only the admins can create Office 365 groups. And of course, when we say can create Office 365 groups, we essentially mean everything in Office 365, because every portion of collaboration is done through Office 365 groups now. There is no way around it. There's some little temporary workarounds, but moving forward, you should brace yourself to work in this method now. That's the script. It's essentially a PowerShell script. You can find it online as well. That allows you to define your group creation policy, which means who is allowed, which security group is allowed to create Office 365 groups in a self-service manner. The other thing is the group naming policy. I'm going to show you where that is, because once again, we're in Azure AD Premium. And remember, I went to my Active Directory, I clicked on groups, and I have a couple of settings here: an expiration policy, a naming policy, and access reviews, which I'll go over in a few seconds. You have all your groups. I'm not sure what changed in this preview mode. And here I have a naming policy. Now there's two parts to a naming policy. You can block certain words from being used, but they have to basically be the exact words. So, I mean, it's great, mostly used in education space so far, but I haven't really used it in enterprise. You download the CSV file, you just comma separate every word that you want to not be available when people create Office 365 groups, and you're back to uploading the file, and these words will be blocked. It's not 100% foolproof though. And then you have your group naming policy. Whenever an Office 365 group is being created by an end user, based on certain categories, based on certain criteria, you can add a prefix automatically or a suffix at the end of the Office 365 group. You have some examples here, but we're going to see right now, it's just the group name. So if I decided to call my Office 365 group or my Microsoft Teams Apricot, it's going to be called Apricot. But if I want, I can add a prefix. And the prefix can be based on an attribute of the person creating the Office 365 group. Of course, that works if you are in self-service. Because if you are the only person creating all the Office 365 groups, then it might be a little different. But here, attribute, it can be the company, the department, the office, or other user properties that you want to make available. And in this method, it'll be the name of the department dash apricot, right? And it's the same thing for suffix. When you're done, you click save, and the policy will be applied. Next thing is, of course, identifying inactive Office 365 groups. And there's no way, to be honest. There's a couple of scripts. I put the script here online, very difficult. There's Tony Redmond that's done that previous script, that's also done a new script on GitHub that you can go and download. So hopefully this helps you out, because the challenge here in finding duplicates is there's no real method to do so, but it's also hard to find inactive groups for your lifecycle management. How do you know when they're no longer good is going to be a challenge for you, because you can't just look at the last modified date of SharePoint or whether or not they're using Teams in the chat, because they could be using Power BI, they could be using Planner, they could be using the mailbox, they could be using Microsoft Forms only. So you have to scan across all the different products that are attached to your Microsoft Teams, which are really attached to your Office 365 group, and see the activity in all of these. So there's some scripts that do their best, but it's always a little bit of a challenge. And here you can try your best to find duplicates. Typically, we try to do that using the hyperlink of SharePoint. If we see that it's the same hyperlink of SharePoint, but then there's some numbers added at the end, one of good chances is that this is a duplicate. But it's tough because they could have called it team marketing and then they called it marketing team. And so this is a duplicate, but how do you make sure that you identify them? One of the ways that I recommend customers is basically run a report every week of all the new teams and all the new Office 365 groups that were created this week and compare them to your entire list. And it is what it is. There's no easy solution, sadly, for us. And then everything related to groups compliance still works. And what does that mean is that your audit works. So if you have questions of who created the Team Contoso, who made Mallory a Teams owner, who changed the channel settings, I want to know whenever a team is created. For this, you're going to go into the Security and Compliance Center. In fact, more and more, you'll be visiting the Security and Compliance Center in Office 365 to deal with cross-product governance. As you're moving into this modern workplace where you're deploying teams and you want that to be successful, you're going to want to govern and scale with multiple products at the same time. And that's where the whole auditing portion, the alerts that you're going to be setting up, that you're looking at, the policies, the classifications, the data governance, everything is really going to be, if you're searching for something, a content search or audit search, if I go back to it, you'll be able to, and get some issues with my internet there. There you go, your new alert policy. And if you don't want to do an alert policy, you can just look for it. You click on what kind of activities you're looking into. You type Teams, and you'll say user sign in to Teams, upgraded, change notification, unblock team device. And you have some other ones. You have like added a channel, deleted a channel. This is called the management API, but if you're in the interface, we call this the audit log search. And here you can see when this event created a channel has happened. So you select it, you specify a date, date range. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to do all of this for too long here, but you'll be able to search. You'll get the results with as much information possible to answer those questions. You can filter on users. So the audit log here is going to show you these channels created and whatever else you're looking into. You also have the, that's the example just in case. Then you have the content search. Who posted about our super secret project Longhorn? You can content search it across Microsoft Teams and mailboxes. What messages have been posted to channel secret? What was the content of a certain deleted message? I need to find all messages from Mallory. All of these can be answered and exported into an Excel file, a CSV file, using the content search tool in the Security and Compliance Center. Because now, remember, you're not dealing with the deployment of Microsoft Teams. You're deploying with group-connected collaboration products. You've got to scale across products now. If you want to block external people, it's not just from Teams, it's from all of them. Or if you want to monitor them, they could be in SharePoint without being in Teams. Now, there's a way for you to create a secret group. That means right now, every time someone creates a Microsoft Teams, it creates a team site, but it also creates a mailbox, which means that the group will appear in the global address list. Now, this can be set to off, and I believe that they changed that so that the default may not do that if you create it from Teams instead of creating it from Outlook. But if ever you want to on-demand change the state and hide it from the global address list, that's going to be your command line. And if ever you want to make the calendar only, I've left the flag here as well. Running out of time, so I'm going to go through a number of things very quickly. We're almost at the end. We have dynamic groups as well that you can implement if you have Azure AD Premium. which means that the membership of an Office 365 group is automatically updated based on certain criteria. So I want everyone whose department is marketing to be in this Microsoft Teams. You can do that using dynamic Office 365 groups, but everyone has to have the license of Azure AD Premium assigned. There's multi-domain support, and there's guest user management that you can go through so that you can create policies of who can allow the additional external users or guests in your Office 365. Now remember, if you're in Microsoft Teams and you allow an external guest to be added into your Teams chat, they're not just in your chat, they're in your Microsoft Teams, they're in the mailbox, they're everywhere that supports guest user access. So remember, you're doing cross-product governance now. One thing I want to talk to you about as well is in your Azure, I'm just going to open up a new one because it's hard for me to get to. If you're managing your Microsoft Teams that have been created, but in terms of governance, you'll be looking at your Office 365 groups. And there's another option called a group expiration policies, where you can say, look, after the lifetime in days created of 60 days after the group was created, contact the group owners of the groups that I mentioned here and ask them whether or not they want to keep the Office 365 group. If they do not answer that they want to keep the group, that means they forget or they were on vacation, the group and the Teams chat and the SharePoint and everything along it will be deleted automatically. Now they've added something where they automatically detect the policy, but it's still something you should take into consideration, and this is also Azure AD Premium only. Another thing that I truly enjoy is the access reviews, which is the ability for you to frequently say, create a new access review, give it a name, and you can say, what I want to do is every month or every quarter, I want to scan for guest users in the Office 365 group. That means people outside of my Office 365 group. You can choose for which Office 365 group you want this to happen and who should be validating this. Group owners, a specific user. I like group owners. I think if you want to scale with Teams and with Office 365 group connected things, we're going to have to ask a couple of things from the group owners, like, hey, are all these people that are from outside the company in your group still legit, or can we remove them, and can you please do so? And this is what an access review will do, is ask the group owner to be accountable for what's happening inside of the Office 365 group, while providing them all the tools that they need to make sure that they can make a quick answer and not bother them too much, but providing you the value that you need. This is, however, only in Azure AD Premium as well. I know we're past the time, so I'll go with the last two slides. I recommend, of course, that you first modernize in your SharePoint. You plan your provisioning. Who can create Office 365 groups? You don't have a lot of options there. Some people create a custom Power Apps with Microsoft Flow process. Some people buy third-party tools. Some people figure it out with scripts. And some people just say, send me an email and I create your Microsoft Teams. Just figure out what your plan will be for provisioning all of this. Because if you disable self-service, people will start going to Dropbox or Slack. They'll bypass you to get what they need because now the internet provides these services. Prevent sprawl by making sure you have an expiration policy and retention policies. You don't want your Office 365 to keep growing with people creating team sites in Microsoft Teams, because then we can't find what we're looking for. It's hard to navigate, and it makes the search even harder for it to help you with relevant and fresh content. So find an archive solution where things get removed from your tenant and your environment so that they're not still there and still on forever, part of the navigations of all your sites. Very challenging there. Cross-product governance. Don't start managing just one product when you're enabling teams and you want that to scale. You want to make sure that there's classification labels, there's external sharing on across products. The Security and Compliance Center will be your friend for this, but also in Azure Active Directory, which is where many of the settings are. Then you're ready to start Microsoft Teams if you've created that plan in the first place. I don't mean create a 200-page PDF. I mean, just figure out how this is going to plan out, do a pilot, start with a smaller group, and then you'll be able to scale with that. And start looking at making owners accountable. If the team owners have so much power, you want to make sure there's always a team owner in every Office 365 group or teams. You want to make sure there's a minimum number of 2 usually. If somebody's on vacation and something needs to happen, you want to be able to that scale, because if everyone has to contact IT, we're not better positioned to do so. So you want to make sure that that's done. What we've done is we've created a book here for you. The image is wrong. It's not migration adoption. It's about governance. So you can download the ebook right now. Go to sharegate.com/governance guide. And there's a number of content written by not only us here at ShareGate, but some MVPs, some Microsoft field engineers that provide guidance from the field on how to make sure governance goes right with your deployment of Office 365 groups and Teams, of course. So feel free to download it at any point in time. If ever you're looking for help, of course, we're at ShareGate and we've built a tool for all of this. So I hope the webinars help. You can try this for free. It works for 30 days, and you'll have governance to help you make Microsoft Teams everyone's favorite tool. You can try it for free. Folks, thank you very much. We'll switch into the ShareGate chat now on Twitter if you want to join us. Otherwise, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope your Microsoft Teams deployment is going to go well. Otherwise, feel free to contact us. Thank you.